communication. Now, the communication that we are looking at is specifically aimed at fault finding. Now, we've discussed communication, and a lot of the things that we'll be looking at with the communication is very similar to a lot of the areas where we deal with it in electrical, but it is primarily to do with fault finding. So we will discuss some areas. So communication is always important, whatever you're doing in life, but it's important to communicate progress of fault finding diagnosis process to the clients at all stages, as the implications affect the fault that could affect the business and the quality of life. So there's lots of little stages that we'll look at with communication, and we'll go through them. So these implications will be as a result of the loss of circuits or certain pieces of equipment not being able to be used. You need to understand the issues that may have to communicate, along with the reasons why. This will help to generate good client relationship and reassure them. And now you'll come across that good client relationship quite a few times. It's a really important thing that we always look at in fault finding, and in all areas of working with someone. If you build up a good client relationship, and it might be the first time you're working with them, if they have a fault again or something happens, they are more likely to reuse you if you've built up a good client relationship. And as electricians, and repeat business will be a big part of that. So it should also be made clear to the manager client what equipment you'll be working on and how this may affect their operation. For example, carrying out isolation, what parts of the installation will be affected. You should also communicate with others in the premises who could be affected by your work, such as workers, colleagues, customers, clients, and representatives of other services, as they may not be able to carry out their work if you have to power off. Now, I know you like this always when I go back to certain things, but I remember working in supermarkets and we were going to have to turn power off and there were freezers involved. So either the stuff was going to have to come out of the freezer because we may be working on that area for a long period of time, or that the freezers had to get sealed off to make sure that the items didn't get too cold. So it's just little communication things like this. And we've looked at it before, that if you were working on computers, obviously we'd need to make sure they were backed up, and various things. Now, if a piece of equipment has failed, speak to the equipment operator. They can tell you exactly what happened when the equipment stopped working and whether it has happened before. Although possibly not technically competent, they may be able to point to you to something that went wrong before. For example, there was a knocking noise from there and then it stopped working. The last time this happened, an electrician changed this part. Now, you can never take that as gospel because, as you say, they're not competent, but it will help you working out. If you went round to somebody's house and they said, this light has stopped working, and if you ask them questions, okay, what's happened before? Anything happened before the light stopped working? And you might find that the plumber had come in and they lifted some floorboards, or someone had put a picture on the wall and they drilled into the wall. So these type of things may help you. They might not have any idea, or they might even say to you, oh, there was a noise, a sparky noise coming from somewhere, or there was a burning smell. And these types of information may help you to narrow it down. Now, this is a really important part of communication. When you have diagnosed the fault and before you carry out the rectification, you need to communicate with the customer client about the nature of the fault and the operations for repair and replacement. This information will enable a client customer to decide whether to authorize you to carry out the repair or replacement of the equipment. And we're going to go through this in a little bit more detail. But what you've got is, it might be cheaper to buy a new piece of equipment than you to repair it because of the time it takes. But it might be that you've got a really old bit of equipment that you can't buy a new one. Or it might be a really expensive bit of equipment, and by doing that, it will help you. So these are the factors to take in consideration. The cost. If it's going to cost you 50, 100, 200, 300 pounds to repair it, they have to decide whether it's worth buying a new one. The availability of replacement parts or resources or staff. So it might be that sometimes something's so old that you can't get the parts for it. Or with some of the technology that's involved in there, it might be such a skilled job that staff or resources don't exist anymore. And how long it will take. So if there's a conveyor belt maybe in a factory that's gone down and it's going to take you 2 weeks to get the parts and repair it, they may just buy a new motor or something so that the factory isn't out of action for that long and they're not losing that much money. Legal and personal responsibilities. Is it in warranty? Is it not in warranty? Have they got a contract with the maintenance provider? Or things like this. Access to the equipment and systems. So if it was in an area where you couldn't isolate because of the equipment was being used. Provision of emergency or standby supplies. So if it was a factory, and you were going to have to isolate an area, could you get a standby generator or a standby supply or wire something to make sure that some equipment carried on working? As like the client demand for continuous supply and out of hours working. To maintain a good client relationship, and this is a key word, good client relationship, as well as a good working relationship with other workers, and to avoid any misunderstandings, it's important to provide relevant persons with the information on fault diagnostic and correct work, clearly, courteously, and accurately. Now, you'll see this really important. They use this a lot. Clearly, courteously, and accurately. Many new clients will be cautious at first and will have found they would have made their minds filled with the thoughts of cowboys or scams or conmen who aren't adequately qualified. So you need to show them by going through all these steps that you know what you're talking about. You're very clear. If you explain to somebody that it might cost a certain amount of money to do it, and when it comes to it, you find it's cheaper to do that job, and you only charge them for the lower end of the quote, they are going to be quite surprised because they wouldn't expect that. You may not make the money, but you'll get repeat business. So if it's a big company, a big factory, and you can carry on working there, we've all heard stories, and some of you have got cars now, where you take a car to a garage and they go, oh yeah, it's going to be this and it's going to be that, and it's such a pleasant surprise when you go into a garage to have an MOT and they go, no, it's all fine. So explaining the process every step of the way, keeping them informed about the progress, the cost will help them relieve their worries about the situation.